Hi, writer friends. Welcome back to our creative process interview series where writers and healers discuss creative practice and share inspiration and flow. I'm Meg Heyerts. I'm the author of Tarot for Beginners and the founder of Creative Momentum, where we help writers free their voice, nourish their practice, and finish their project. I'm so happy to be joined today by Monica West. Monica is the author of Revival Season, which was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, a Barnes& Noble Discover Selection, and shortlisted for the VCU Cabell First Novelist Award. She's a graduate of Duke University, New York University, and the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she was a Rona Jaffe Graduate Fellow. She has received fellowships and funding from Bread Loaf, Hedgebrook, Kimbilio Fiction, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She currently lives in Seattle, where she is working on two novel projects. Welcome, Monica. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, Meg, it's so good to see you again. Thanks for inviting me.
Would you please read to us a little bit from Revival Season?
Sure. The part that I chose to read today, which we'll get into in just a moment, the book is about family. And one of my favorite relationships in this book was between the mother and her daughter. So a lot of the book is kind of tumultuous, but I'm going to read this really, this moment of levity between the mother, Joanne, and her oldest daughter, Miriam. When I got closer to the kitchen, the music slid into my veins. The hi-hat's tinny tapping was persistent as guitars and drums faded, leaving nothing but a woman's mournful voice singing about a man who left her, her high notes breaking away from the music and modulating until they landed on a sound more animal than human. A pair of feet patted a syncopated rhythm in the kitchen's dimness, quick steps that were out of place with the slow words and music. When I craned my neck around the corner, all of the weight of Ma's growing body was raised on the balls of her feet. Her eyes were closed, and her right arm was bent several inches in front of her, as though she were holding someone who wasn't there. She looked younger than I'd ever seen her, unencumbered by the heaviness of pregnancy and revival season that had stooped her shoulders. I watched her reflection as she passed the black mirrored pools of the kitchen windows. My eyes slid to her undulating hips that drove her from the cabinets to the stove, buffeting her against the refrigerator and back toward the sink, her face tilted upward. Her limbs threaded together in front of her, swimming their way to the light. Carnal, Papa probably would have muttered if he had been here. But this wasn't the evil of the flesh that he said was sin. For a moment, I saw the dancer that she'd been before she met Papa. I leaned against the door jamb, my shoulder touching the wall. I couldn't shift my eyes from her, from the smile that tickled the sides of her mouth as her lip formed words to lyrics I'd never heard her say. I'll be your lover, better than any other. I'll make you moan and scream with ecstasy. Her lips should have stumbled over those words, but there was only unfettered joy behind her closed, fluttering eyelids as her languid limbs moved like they were floating underwater. I wonder how many nights she went downstairs while we slept, a thin floor the only thing separating us. The song ended, and her eyes opened and focused on me as the opening chords to a new song filled the room. Her mouth widened in shock, and she wrapped her hands around her nightgown as though she were naked. Did I wake you up? She transformed in front of me, jamming the screen of her phone until the room was quiet. Her scared eyes darted as her quick neck craned around me. He's not here. Her shoulders relaxed, and she collapsed in the kitchen chair. All the vibrancy in her face and body slowly left the room. I took the chair across from her. I've never seen you dance like that, Ma. She shrugged. Can you teach me? A sparkle in the corner of her normally dimmed eyes provided a glimmer of the Ma I'd just seen. She pressed both hands against the table and turned toward the door once more. When she got to her feet, she stretched out her hand toward me. I grabbed it, and she pulled me to a standing position. Soon we were in the middle of the kitchen floor. Her phone began another song with a quicker beat, like the rat-tat-tat of sudden rain against a windowsill. She crooked her arm around the small of my back and pressed me against the hard, protruding mound of her stomach, flattening her breasts against mine as she collapsed the gap between us with one swift jerk of her arm. Our bodies moved as one, her hips rocking a couple seconds before mine caught up. My clumsy body was off kilter as it rammed into hers, bouncing us off each other and sending me away from her in a twirl. When I stopped spinning and found her again, she was extending her arm across the kitchen toward me. She spun me again, all while singing along to the lyrics. We danced until that song ended, and then through another few songs until I lost count. Up, you're muted, Meg.
That
Okay.
was good. Mercury retrograde. That was so beautiful. I
Thank you.
love
Thank
that
you.
section. And I think that comes after kind of a betrayal by the mother. I love the
Yes.
complexity that, they have all the modes of
Yeah, thank you.
relating.
Yeah. I felt like I knew this scene was important because this like the family's so complex and she and her mother are so close, but their mother has betrayed her. And so this is like a way they feel like they're always kind of dancing with each other, not physically, but always kind of bouncing off. And so that scene
Mm,
feels representative of some of that dynamic that I was trying to create between them.
yes. So for my first question, I'm just gonna go big because
Sure.
it's such a rich book and I just want to get into it. So the novel starts with 15-year-old Miriam, who was the daughter who was dancing there, um, having a really profound crisis of faith. And her doubt and awakening are just so multi-layered. Um, Her father is a preacher, and she's losing faith in the moral authority of him, even though she loves him and she admires him, and he ignores her, um, to say the least, at first. And she's also losing faith in the evangelical paradigm that her father embodies, in part because she has a secret desire to be a preacher and a healer, which women aren't allowed to be in her world. And as she begins to see her father as fallible and actually increasingly cruel, she's also questioning God's power and God's intentions. And she asks why it is that the divine, who has the power to heal, allows us to suffer, specifically through her sister Hannah's disability and the tragedy of her stillborn brother, Isaiah. Um, and then later, these questions of divine healing and divine will become embodied in Miriam as she becomes a healer and she's learning her gift and also navigating the limits of healing. So, could you speak to any of that? Could you speak to Miriam's layers of questioning, and if the characters' biblical namesakes informed how you thought about these themes in the plot of the novel, as well as perhaps maybe more generally, how you see the relationship between spirituality, suffering, and power structures? Just
Yeah.
to start you off with a softball
Just a little
question.
softball question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a great question, Meg. And just like such a careful reading that kind of, generated that question. So I think that the questioning was really important to me. When you write books and think about, arcs, we always talk about character arcs and how we show a character changing and growing over time. Miriam's arc is an arc of growing maybe from faith to doubt or from very tenuous. Like the book begins with Miriam having seen something last summer that kind of cracks a tiny bit of her belief, and her belief in her father and her belief in her faith feel kind of parallel at the beginning. He's this person who's kind of embodied what their Baptist faith looks like and what they live. And it starts to fracture the previous summer, but I begin the summer after when she still believes in good in him. She still believes in the teachings of the church. And these questions just start to kind of pile up until there's a point where she can no longer, in good conscience, believe what she's been taught. And so the questioning kind of starts off kind of surface level, like this thing happened. She watches her father do something that's horrible, this like act of violence, and it almost seems like that's this thing that opens her eyes to. all these possibilities. Kind of, she thinks about what happened the previous summer. And then there's this kind of new, maybe renewed violence that then gets visited on her family as a result of her father's failures. And so that level of questioning of her father, as you were pointing out, Meg, is really aligned with then this idea of, well, if this thing that he's been telling me to believe in or that's true, if that is all maybe like not quite a fiction, but if this is, if he is telling me this, but then he's this really flawed person in real deep ways, then where is my relationship to this larger power, this divine, this faith, this God? And the rest of the book is just grappling with that until what she kind of leans into. I think this book would have been, people have talked to me about this is an easy losing my religion story. Of course, she sees this thing and then she falls off. It's like, forget it, forget this whole family, forget everything. And yet, the grappling that Miriam comes back to over and over again is there's still something in her that like still believes and then but it has to believe in a different way and it has to involve her stepping into this power that she's thought was denied to her, was denied to women, and then the rest of the book kind of spins on that axis. So it's questioning all the way through. It's questioning family, it's questioning faith, it's questioning the power structures and patriarchy, but it's ultimately about coming into what you believe to be true for yourself, even if that puts you at a collision course with what your family believes. And so that's this idea of questioning like all the way through. In terms of the namesakes of the characters, I was thinking a lot, especially about Miriam's character. As the sister of Moses. And yet it's like I kind of write that story into the book. It's a story she tells Hannah. And this idea of a strong woman from the Bible, a strong biblical leader, and yet that story always gets overshadowed in the story of Moses. And so kind of duplicating the relationship between Miriam and Caleb with the relationship between Miriam and Moses, and you doing everything you can to kind of shield your brother into or to kind of protect your brother or just to kind of be like all of the things that you do being overshadowed. And so I thought a lot about that in terms of Miriam's namesake. And then the other one that I was really interested in, I mean, they're all biblical names except for Joanne. And so I was interested in that dynamic because Joanne is the only member of this family that, like, one of the storylines about her is that she comes from a past that is not a past of religion. And so she gets converted by the father really early in their courtship and then marries him and gets swept away in this life and this motherhood and this marriage. And so she's the character that almost feels like the outsider in the fact that, like, everyone else, Samuel, Miriam, Isaac, Hannah, Isaiah, Caleb, they all have these biblical names, and yet Joanne is the outsider there, and yet she has converted to become this, or she's, now become this believer, and she's become this partner with Samuel on his journey. And what does that mean for her? And then I think finally the last part about yeah, spirituality, suffering, and power structures. I wanted to visit how that's embodied on the bodies of women and girls in the way that the church the work church that this book is based on, um, is leads to so much, um, like disempowerment of women. And what does that feel like in this place of the most power, the seat of the most power in the church and the family is kind of all embodied in her father. And yet, what does it feel like for Miriam to kind of step into some kind of new awakening, step into some new religious understanding, step into some new power? How does that break these really fragile patriarchal structures, both in the church and within her family? So the book was grappling with kind of all of that on all these different levels, and that's what I was kind of trying to do.
Thank you so much for
Sure.
speaking to that. Um, so the central characters in Revival Season are a family of five, and there's so many dynamics happening and escalating between these characters, not to mention between them and all the other characters. There's so many plot threads, but it's easy to follow always.
Oh,
Um,
great.
it's amazing. And I want to ask you how you did that. Part of the clarity comes from really thoughtfully chosen gestures that speak volumes. And I imagine another part of it is you must be really good at killing darlings, or maybe you have a kinder phrase for that. When you're depicting webs of relationships, is there any aspect of craft that you rely on to kind of gauge how much is the right amount of information to give the reader? And or in terms of scene and plot, how do you choose what belongs and release what doesn't?
That's such a great question and such a smart way of thinking about process. In terms of like, I appreciate that the gestures came through. I think that this book, in so many ways, in the way that I kind of think through, the lens is like books are always about character for me, and so this book is Miriam's, and so like when I'm thinking about process and craft and relationship, I'm always thinking about it through the lens of character. Kind of how does this reflect the Miriam that I've created? How does this reflect the relationship that I'm developing here? I'm digging deep into kind of who these people were before Samuel and Joanne, who they were before. How does that impact how they parent? And then these interpersonal relationships between these siblings, this complicated. One of my other favorite relationships in the book is between Miriam and Hannah, and the kind of careful mothering that she kind of gives her younger sister who has cerebral palsy, just showing Miriam's kind of role as the kind of central glue of this family and holding them together. And it always feels tenuous, this whole, it's always close to breaking. And so I thought a lot about character. A lot of that craft to me comes from character. And in terms of another thing about craft, and you mentioned this, is a scene and summary. I love, 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 love scene. I struggle with summary and this idea of kind of how do I get through this bit of time? I just want to kind of linger in scene for long periods of time and don't always want to kind of like push the reader forward in time. And so I think what was helpful for this book is that it's one character, it's one first person narrator. That's generally my happy place, is to kind of deal in first person. Not everyone does. It just works for me, and to deal with Miriam's eyes. So showing one major arc, but then showing smaller arcs between kind of the healings, the friendships, the fractured relationships, the fall of the church, the revivals, all those parts are all kind of to show Miriam's growth as a character into her own agency. And I think scenes are really important for me to kind of figure out what gets dramatized in scene. What do I summarize? What feels less important for the growth of Miriam that I can kind of push through? And then I think it was helpful that I made the book the frame of a year. Though we kind of go back in memory to the previous summer, the book itself has a really tight frame. And so it felt less on like this book could have been something that took place over Awakening that took place over, 6 years. But by making it 1 year, I was allowed to really zoom into what are the moments for Miriam that really highlight and dramatize this real frustration, or it's a stronger word than that, this like real like betrayal that she feels at kind of the hands of members of her family, at her father, at her mom. And what are the scenes that get me there? What summary that can get me through there? But that frame, that tight frame, was helpful for me. It might not be helpful for all writers. It was helpful for me. And choosing what belongs, you asked this question about I must be good at killing my darlings. I feel like I think I've gotten better at it. I think I have these moments, and as writers, we all know, there are these days like, I love this. This is so good. And then when it has to go, like, but I spent 3 days on this one paragraph. It was so good. And recognizing when it doesn't serve the piece. And sometimes that comes from me. And I know that, I'm working on a revision right now, which we'll talk about. But sometimes it comes from me, and sometimes it comes from someone other than me that's saying, this is really not serving the scene. And I got a lot of editorial feedback in early revisions of revival season that I was focusing on things that were slowing the book down. I need to kind of get from plot point to plot point. So pushing me more towards summary and pulling me away from scene and letting me summarize certain things. And through a little bit of my own reading and a little bit of editors and agents reading, I feel like my darlings exist in another document, so I don't feel like they're dead, but they're on the cutting room floor for sure, because if it were left to me, I would just kind of spend time with characters in relationship with each other and not necessarily progress plot. So that's like character, that management of scene and summary. I feel like those are the ways that
Mm.
I kind of think about the craft processes that felt most important when I was working with this book.
That's so illuminating. That's great. I have one of those documents too of everything I
Yeah,
could.
nothing will go away, just all
Yeah.
somewhere else.
And I have it organized into like maybe possibly helpful to come back and like not helpful, but not leaving.
Exactly, exactly. No, I totally get that.
Um, in this book, I love the balance and the interplay between Miriam's inner and outer challenges. And I noticed that revival season follows the hero's journey,
Yeah.
which we love at Creative Momentum, along with other story structures. Did the hero's journey structure help bring out that balance between inner and outer journey? Was that something you were consciously thinking about? People often have really strong opinions about the hero's journey, often negative. But
Yeah.
you've written a really beautiful feminist hero's journey story. So I'm curious what your relationship is to that form and whether you're using it in your other novels that you're writing.
Yeah, it's so interesting that, I cannot say, it's so interesting to say, I don't know if I was consciously aware of it, but I do know that I think that maybe it's so embedded that it just feels like something that feels, just kind of implicit. I taught for a long time. I know, I taught like high school English, and so I'm very familiar with that structure. And we kind of read it and mapped it onto the Odyssey and kind of other things that we'd read, and so I'm familiar with that kind of line. And so I know it made its way in there, even though I don't know if I was using it, I was being really aware of it when it was happening. And I think that that shape is just interesting to me though, because um the way I thought about this book is, opening at opening books have to open at we're at the precipice for change. And so we have to see the character kind of at this at this place where they are able to kind of break open in new ways. And so I did, in the early version of the book, the long journey to get Miriam there took half of the book. And, my agent said, this is too, or my editor said, this is too slow. You need to get us there in 50 pages. And so it's like, oh my gosh. So kind of moving that up forward and kind of front loading Miriam's previous frustration, thinking about that arc and what does it mean to kind of have obstacles at every turn, and then but then what's the new illumination? And so like as the external frame reveals itself about what she's fighting against in larger ways, it mirrors in some ways the ways that she's kind of coming to terms with her upbringing, coming to terms with the flaws in her family, coming to terms with her own faith. And so I feel I would love to be smart and say I was very carefully mapping that on. I think I
Okay.
was doing it in the kind of reverse way, but it's part of the way I think of narrative.
It's it's literally down to the page. Like crossing the threshold is exactly one-fourth
Yeah.
of the way through the book, and
Oh
the
my
point is
gosh.
exactly at the halfway mark.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. It's so weird. Like I guess I know I've internalized it, but it's like definitely didn't think about it as explicitly. So like I feel very smart to do that. I did not do that intentionally. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
And then, sorry, you're asking if I use it in other novels. Potentially, I wonder if because I think about that as a shape and it just feels like a shape that makes sense to me, even if I don't think, about that in terms of kind of how long things are. Um, Potentially, yeah, the one I'm revising right now might have a very similar shape. Yeah, different story, similar shape. Yeah,
yeah, I love what you say about, it has to start on the precipice of change. And that's what I
yeah,
love about that form is that it catalyzes change.
yes,
And yeah, it keeps the transformation having to happen.
yeah,
Um, all right. Would you like me to pull a tarot card for you?
absolutely.
Hey, is there anything in your current process that you're working with that yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to, what's the process I'm trying to work through right now? I feel like I'm trying to create, I write, female characters. I'm trying to create this like woman who, um, out of this deep love and devotion for her sister, um, is like looking for a missing sister. It's a story about someone looking for a missing sibling and the depths at which we go through to find someone that we love. And I think I'm still working on clarifying what parts of this, like what parts of my character now, her name is Ramona, are shaped, like what is her journey and what's like where she's leaning into her sister's journey. And so I'm thinking about that in terms of how I'm making these characters like motivations believable and transformations believable. So that's like what I feel like I'm working my way through.
Mm. You want to do a mini relationship spread between them?
Great.
Okay.
Great.
All right. So we'll just pull a card for Ramona's heart in the relationship
Great.
and one
Yeah.
for what is her sister's name?
Maya.
And one for Maya's heart in the relationship.
Great.
All right. Tell me when to stop shuffling.
Stop.
Ooh. So we've got the moon and the wheel of fortune reversed. This,
Okay.
um, I'm not surprised that you got two major arcana cards. So the deck is divided into the major arcana, which is the major mysteries, and the
Hmm.
minor arcana, which is the minor mysteries. And when you pull, it's less likely to pull major arcana because there's fewer of them.
Hmm.
But when you do, it means you're really embracing your journey and you're on
Oh,
a deep
great.
journey. So, Ramona's heart in the relationship is the moon card. And this is a card of really going into the unknown,
Mm,
into the darkness. So she's
hmm.
looking for someone who's missing,
Yeah.
um, and into her intuition
Okay.
is so I'm curious if there, and you can respond to this or not. Um,
Yeah.
if there's a relationship between the like the logistical unknowns
Yeah.
and the rise of her kind of intuitive knowing.
Yeah. So, the what the book ends up being is that, I'm not sure if this answers your question. Um, they've been looking for a sister for 4 years, and then she sees this group of women that kind of find her. And she sees this bracelet that looks really familiar. It looks like one of Maya's bracelets, and it feels like this kind of link to these women. But where these women lead her to, where her sister ends up being, is this cult that she ends up kind of having to kind of go look and find Maya there. But then part of this idea of this cult is that she thinks it's so easy for her to kind of get in and get out. Like, I'm going to get her just, and get out. And it becomes not so easy. And so her mission that feels very clear to her when she first gets there now becomes really muddied as she's trying to kind of wade her way through the logistical kind of challenges of like, oh, I never thought that she'd actually feel at home here. And what does home
Mm.
mean? And how do I
Mm.
kind of grapple with my own sense of what she needs versus what she thinks she needs? And how much do I push and, bring her back? And how much do I let her kind of have her
Mm.
own power? So that's that arc. And then, being in a place for a little bit, I feel like some of the teachings start to seep in and some of the things that she's kind of, grappling with her sister. She basically at the end the place ends up becoming a little too dangerous for them to stay, but she still feels a little bit of connection to the place because she's been there for a bit and she has connections to some of the women there. So that's that arc.
Mm. The Another aspect of this card is kind of how our subconscious gets formed
Yeah.
early in life. So
Yeah.
I imagine there might also be questions, you're talking about like what is home? Where do we feel
Hmm.
spiritually at home? Um,
Hmm.
questions for both of them,
Yeah.
particularly Ramona, she's trying to understand Maya about like how did we get here? How did we get to
Hmm.
this place? Like how did our family influence us getting to this.
Right.
And a prompt that you can play with is just like literal darkness.
Hmm.
The card just kind of asks like what happens in the dark. Uh,
Yeah.
And there's also this aspect of safety and danger being
Hmm.
clear in the moonlight because there's less details and it's more stark.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
you're already playing with
fantastic.
all of
Yeah, 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 yeah.
this is
Yeah,
confirmation.
yeah, fantastic.
And for Maya, this is the reversed Wheel of Fortune. The Wheel of Fortune is about changes of fate,
Hmm.
cycles, seasons. Reversed, there's a resistance to, I don't know, if resisting letting change happen is right for her.
Hmm.
It could be kind of an interruption in her cycles of fate. Um, yeah, does that?
Yeah, yeah. Like when she comes, it's there's an interesting like kind of opposite dynamic is that when that Ramona's the younger sister looking for her older sister, and kind of with the time that she looks for Maya, Maya disappeared when she was 18. By the time she finds Maya, she's 22 and she's an adult and she's making her own choices. And Ramona's presence causes this interruption in this life that Ramona's asking questions about kind of, well, now she's an adult. Can she stay here? Is this okay for her? And she's just as Maya's leaning in more to this life here, Ramona comes to interrupt it and kind of tell her that she needs to come home. But home is this place that wasn't amazing when she was there. And so it's this idea of you know, I still want to make home here. I want to make home this way that I've learned that home is, and this place feels safe. And the interruption of her life that she was choosing for herself,
Mm,
Ramona representing less of like, I want, oh, I'm so grateful that you're here and want to bring you back to what we've known as home, but maybe you can stay here with me and make this home yourself. And then that kind of being that cycle that's interrupted. So that's what that revealed as you were
mm.
speaking.
Yeah, because Maya's pursuing something
Yes.
beyond her
Yeah,
family of origin. And so
exactly.
is Ramona here to interrupt that, whatever she needs to learn
Exactly.
beyond that family.
Yeah,
And there's also kind of this cycling of the sibling order. Um,
right. Exactly. I thought about that when you said reversal. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you usually think of the older sibling being the one who consistently pursues the younger. And Miriam is the age that I was trying to kind of play with Ramona not Miriam, oh my gosh, Ramona. We're talking about Miriam. Maya disappears when she's 18. And when Ramona hits the same age, like where she feels older than she knew Maya to be, she doesn't know Maya as an adult yet because she disappeared. And so this sense of like what does it mean to kind of take on the mantle of kind of doing this thing even though you're the younger sister looking for your older sister versus
Hmm.
kind of the older sister kind of seeking out the younger, so that reversal feels really powerful and trying to play with that and that dynamic.
Yeah. I'd be curious to know what kind of motifs echo that reversal of role,
Yeah.
as well as what motifs you might use or probably are already using with Maya
Hmm.
to kind of echo that trajectory of like trying to get out and
Yeah.
go towards something.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to think through that. That's a good question of what's in there already, um and
Yeah.
what could be there more. Yeah.
Well, now that you have your assignment, would you give us an assignment?
Sure. So my assignment for you as a writer is one of kind of my favorite things to do. And so I'm gonna try to recommend everyone to take a journal, something by hand, not a computer where a screen kind of divides you, but something that you can write by hand if you're able, and go out in the world. And just to kind of for like set a timer for about, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes or so, and just kind of observe the things, just kind of be the sieve for all the things around you. And so kind of observe and write down all those things, like write down the leaf that falls in front of you, write down the pebbles that are by your feet, things like that. But also write down what you hear, snippets of conversation, ways people are talking to each other, and as much kind of transcribing that as possible. And just like kind of be um just be a vessel for the world and just spend a little time with that. Like do it really briefly at first, like literally sit and make yourself just do it for half an hour, see what comes from that. See what you learn about yourself and your observational experiences, see what you learn about how you describe the world, see what feels interesting to you in that. And then maybe tap a little deeper into that. Was there one part of what you saw that felt compelling? Is there a question that you have about something? Is there a bit of dialogue that you heard that invites a million other interpretations that you want to play with? So let that be a springboard for maybe some other type of creative. Um, Maybe it turned into a story, maybe it turns into something else or a poem. But first, just do the observation, and then don't let yourself go to that next route. But just like
Mhm.
I feel like as writers, we observe, but we're so quick to want that to mean something right away. And so force yourself into that observational mode for half an hour and see what that does for you.
Beautiful. Force yourself into the observational
Yeah.
mode.
Yeah.
You won't regret it. I feel like we have to tell ourselves why.
I know. It's like, well, tell me what the story is. Like, no, just observe for right now. Later, you'll be able to kind of find what the story is or
Yeah.
how why this meant something to you. But for now, just look and listen and smell and all those things and just
Mm,
record it all.
wonderful. Thank you so much, Monica. It's been so great to talk to you. Everyone, please buy Monica's book at there's a link to bookshop.org or go to your local bookstore. Thank you so much, Monica. This has been wonderful.
This was wonderful. You asked wonderful questions. It was so good to see you again after the summer.
You as well. Take good care and
Okay,
happy
you too.
creating, everyone.
Bye bye.